Thank you for joining us here today. I'm Dan Roth, LinkedIn's editor-in-chief. It's a real honor to be joining you here and to be leading this discussion today, which is talking about the film Bending the Arc. It's a documentary now on Netflix that deals with the founding, the challenges, and the life-saving work of Partners in Health. Here's a little clip about the film.
There was a big hole in the program.
They do not know what watches and clocks are.
They don't believe that we have an equal right to life.
The current Ebola outbreak is the world's
This is the worst thing any of us have ever seen.
It's not one person. It is an entire mindset. To build stable institutions where none existed.
Health, which is a state of complete physical...
There was a part of me that felt overwhelmed by it because I was wrenched into the reality that I quickly realized was much of the world.
Health for all is the future.
What is the nature of our responsibility in the world? Is there something like an area of moral clarity?
When we took the blame off the patients and put it on the system, everybody got better.
Health for all is the future.
This is a really powerful film. You can probably tell that from the clip. And this is a very special group of people we have on today. You've got Marshall Goldsmith, Mark Thompson, two of the world's best known and most sought after leadership coaches. Jim Kim, who is the founder, one of the founders of Partner in Health, a physician, anthropologist, and the former head of the World Bank. And joining us a little bit later is Poonam Mojer, a founder of Hard Candy, an entrepreneur, and one of Inc.'s top entrepreneurs of the year. And so we're going to be discussing some of the topics of the film, things that entrepreneurs and leaders and people who are just starting their career can think about, some of the lessons to be taken from not just how you save lives, as Jim Kim has done in his decades working in public health, but how you can take some of those lessons and apply it to whatever it is that you do or that you want to do. Marshall, why don't I throw it over to you just to start, maybe to give you and Dr. Jim Kim have worked together for a very long time. Why don't you just talk a little bit about your relationship and maybe what you'd like the audience to know about Jim?
Yeah, I'd like to kick it off with a little background. I've had the honor of working with many of the top leaders around the world. And, I've worked with people who are spectacular leaders like Alan Mulally, who was CEO of the Year in the United States, and Francis Hesselbein. Peter Drucker said the best leader he's ever met. Hubert Joly, he'd led the incredible turnaround at Best Buy. Fred Hassan. Gail Miller, probably the nicest human being I've ever met in my life. The person I met who's made the biggest contribution to the world, though, by far, is my good friend, Dr. Jim Kim. What he's done in the world is just amazing. He is literally saved the lives or helped save the lives with his friends and Partners in Health, tens of millions of people from around the world. So it's an incredibly inspirational story. Before we get to the story, though, I think it would be good to, and I'll just have a little discussion with Dr. Jim, to share a little, Dr. Jim, of your background, your journey through life, which has been a fascinating story, because I think that'll put this in context for the group. So I kind of like the people, before we get into the movie, just to meet you a little bit. Can you tell us a little of the story of your life?
Well, thanks, Marshall, and thanks, Dan and Mark, for being on this really wonderful session. So I was born in Korea in 1959, and Korea in 1959 was one of the poorest countries in the world. And one of the stories I told a lot when I was president of the World Bank Group was that when I was born, Korea was told by the World Bank that it was in fact too poor and too hopeless to receive a World Bank Group loan. At that time, we didn't have the most low interest loans that we do now for countries like Korea, but it was war torn, and the pronouncements from the World Bank were that this country is so poor, it is so uneducated. The industry and the mineral wealth were all in the northern part of Korea, north of the 38th parallel, that they just didn't know what South Korea would do. And so my parents were both educated, but they were educated because they were very fortunate and they were good students. They were both refugees. They both lived, my father had escaped from the North, never throughout his life ever got back there. And my mother was literally a refugee, having to go to a southern part of Korea during the war. So those were my roots. And then we were lucky enough to come to the United States. My father's a dentist, and I played on various sports teams, and I was the quarterback of our football team in my first sort of leadership experience. But then, Marshall always reminds people, he always asks what the record was of our team. And in fact, we had the longest losing streak, not just in Iowa, where I grew up, but in the nation. So that was not a great start to my leadership journey. But I think the thing that drove me was, my mother was a philosopher. She studied philosophy and religion. And from a very young age, she exposed us to people like Martin Luther King, to Gandhi, and filled our heads with just the great ideas of what we could do and what could happen if we worked hard enough for it. So I grew up with that, and in high school and college, I was very focused on social justice issues. And so I wanted to study philosophy and political science. But my very practical dentist father, one day while I was when he picked me up from the airport and we were driving home, he asked me what I was going to study when I was at Brown, and I told him philosophy and political science. And he literally stopped the car, turned around, and said, "Look, when you finish your residency, you can study anything you want." And so I had this very philosopher mother, very practical dentist father. And I ended up doing both. I ended up getting a medical degree and a PhD in anthropology. And it was this work at Partners in Health that really shaped most of my adult life, and it still shapes it to today. With Paul Farmer, Ophelia Dahl, Todd McCormick, we started this organization, and our sense was that we didn't think that we'd ever have enough money to do any of the things that we wanted to do. We never thought that we would be sort of on the winning team, as it were. We would always be standing with the poorest of the poor. And at that, the time when we started, 1987, there was no Gates Foundation. There was almost no money in the world for health in the poorest countries. And so we didn't think that we'd ever be successful, but we thought we'd have integrity and continue to stand with the poorest populations in Haiti, later in Africa, in Latin America. And so, the movement from doing that to then, being head of HIV at the World Health Organization, and then being the head of 3 departments, and then being the president of a university and the president of the World Bank, it was all very unexpected. And there was no specific path other than that I kept trying to do social justice work, and people kept coming to me with new leadership positions.
Dr. Jim, from a leadership point of view, you've had such a fascinating journey from Partners in Health, Harvard Medical School, president of Dartmouth College, which is where I met you years ago, president of the World Bank, and now you're the vice chair of Global Infrastructure Partners. An amazing journey of leadership. And one of the things I'd like the viewers to get is just this sense of being able to say, look, you can do it. And I never really made the connection with your mother before, but I think that's something that all the viewers can get out of the movie, and hopefully our talk is this feeling of not giving up. You were told, basically in Partners in Health, you were told this cannot happen. This cannot happen. And yet somehow it did happen. Just 1 or 2 suggestions about what you did, and then make a bridge between that and our viewers to say, how might this apply to all of us?
The public health world. I mean, people now know so much more about public health because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But back in those days, we worked on 2 specific issues: drug-resistant tuberculosis and HIV. And for both, we were kind of shocked that the leaders in the public health world said, no, it cannot be done. Of course, we'll treat them in the rich countries, but it cannot actually be done. It's impossible to do in developing countries. And so against really very difficult odds, we thought, well, okay, so we're not gonna be able to change policy overnight, but why don't we just show that it actually can be done, and then go out and continue to push that into people's faces and saying, you said it can't be done, here it is, we did it. But then what we found was that they kept drawing the line again. It's like Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. They kept drawing another line saying, oh, well, okay, so you can do it, but those are special conditions and you guys are, doctors trained in the US. I bet you can't lower the drug prices. And then we do that. And they'd say, well, I bet you can't do it in more than one place. And then we did that. And so, having perseverance and continuing, if you know that it's the right thing, if you know, for example, that declaring a death sentence on 20 million people in Africa who are living with HIV, which is what the public health community did. It declared a death sentence. It said, too complicated, can't do it. If you know that that's wrong, then you've got to do whatever it takes to show that it is wrong and that it can't be done.
And one thing, I'm going to hand it back over to Dan, but we've got a couple of entrepreneurs going to be on the call. Mark is one of the world's experts working with entrepreneurs. We have a special guest, Puna, who is an entrepreneur. But, Dan, I think it'd be a good time to make a transition to how does this relate to the entrepreneurial spirit? And by the way, I think there's learning points here for everyone listening. Dan?
Oh, Dan, we can't hear you.
Let's see here. Can you hear me now? I think that one of the point about taking on these massive challenges can be both intimidating, inspiring, but also probably intimidating for a lot of people. So I would love talking about entrepreneurship to get a sense, and maybe Mark, you can kick this off, to explain how do you move from saying that, look, this is such a big problem, I know I can do this, versus this is such a big problem, this is too big for me, I'm out, I'm not going to do it. What kind of mindset do you have to think this is something that I want to tackle?
Well, from my perspective, I have started companies and running companies, and this morning was on with the Virgin Entrepreneurship Center in Johannesburg. And talking to Richard Branson about this, it's exactly what Jim was saying. Jim and Paul and his team were entrepreneurs of an extraordinary sort. I mean, you decided that you would go out and show people one step at a time. After each barrier was knocked down, you'd go to the next. And then you were faced with having to shift a mindset where they could start to own the solution. I mean, to collaborate with the very people who were resisting this change. I mean, everybody's always talking about how much in favor they are of entrepreneurship and change, and then nobody wants to. It's like, you go first. None of us really want to have to change or be maybe even embarrassed by the fact that we were not really adapting to the change or leading that change. I'd love, Jim, for you to talk about, you had to show them, but people don't like to be shown that they were wrong. And that would increase resistance. How did you embrace this? And you've done this your whole life, right? To the, World Bank. You've showed people the way and then somehow got them to rally around the cause.
Yeah, Mark, that old saying, everything is impossible before it's inevitable, right? I just have experienced that so many times. And the latest is that as we look back, when I talk to young people about the fact that, the leaders in global health said, 20 million people in Africa living with HIV, even though we have great drugs, even though, people literally look like they're rising from the dead, the Lazarus effect, we used to call it. And even though the pills are only taken once in the morning and once in the evening, I'm sorry, Africa, I think we're really talking about the next generation. Some of the people I admire most in the world said exactly that. And so, the response, sometimes the response was not just, it's a good idea. You guys are nice guys. It's women and men, you're nice people. But it's just a little naive. That's not what they said. They were actually angry. So the people who took the position that it couldn't be done were sometimes enraged that we would come along and say, what are you guys doing? You know, this is doable. We've got to do it. Because the feeling that they had, I think, was, who the hell do you think you are? If it was doable, we would have done it. What are you accusing us of? So there was that there. And I think that our ability to deal with that intensity of emotion and then continue to go forward and continue to just step over each line was really important. But it's hard when it's not just sort of doubt that creeps in, but anger. And I have to tell you, I've experienced that. All of the major efforts that we took on, I've experienced that just about every single time.
And when you say anger, do you mean anger that you feel like you have to keep repeating this? Were there times when you watch this film and you're like, all right, well, it's very clear that you're fighting this battle and then you win. The world says, oh, it turns out you can go into some of these incredibly poor communities and bring in drugs and treatment and have people that can help people actually get better. And you see the before and after pictures. But then you go into Peru in the film and you've got to start over again. You have to convince people again that you can actually have an impact. So when you talk about anger, is it that feeling that you already won? Like, why are you being asked to start from scratch again and tell people that you can actually do things?
You know, Dan, it wasn't really the anger that we felt. I mean, we felt a kind of anger that these death penalties had been set up. You know, just one example is in the movie is that the World Health Organization said it's impossible to treat drug-resistant TB in developing countries, and one of the reasons they gave was that the cost of the drugs was too high. And so we asked a simple question: well, are these drugs on patent or off patent? Because if they were off patent, we could reduce the drug prices dramatically by getting them made in China or India. And the guys who had declared the death sentence because drugs were too expensive did not know whether the drugs were on patent or off patent. So they just hadn't bothered to check. So we felt anger at things like that, you know, sort of the willingness to just like declare death sentences without even doing your homework. The anger I was talking about, though, was they were angry at us. The public health establishment was angry at us for suggesting that something could be done that they weren't already doing, right? And so what we had to do was not just get angry back at them. We had to bring them in. We had to make them feel like this was their idea. And that happened fully. So the people who were, and so we started with drug-resistant TB. And then when we went to HIV treatment, it was the same thing. We couldn't believe it's the same thing all over again. And so now the people who were so angry at us for suggesting that we treat HIV in Africa have since rewritten history. And all of them, of course, were strong advocates for HIV treatment from the beginning. And you know what, Dan? That's fine with me. I'm glad that they're back and taking credit for it.
It's incredible. And Mark mentioned this idea that you have to go from fighting people to bringing them into the fold. And I think that's something that's probably not talked about often. What entrepreneurs have to go through is making that mindset shift. These people are against me, and now they're with me, and I'm willing to accept it, and I'm willing to forget that they were ever not with me. This is, I think, a really good time to bring in Poona. Poona, can we get you up on screen here? Would love to hear your experience as an entrepreneur in going through this, whether you have gone through this cycle before, and what it's been like for you, and maybe what other entrepreneurs should be thinking about as they go from trying to, taking on the establishment to then having to work within the establishment.
Well, hi, everyone. Thank you for having me on this talk with these illustrious leaders that we have here. I would say that it's difficult to get people to change, that Mark alluded to. And I found it very interesting that Dr. Kim said we had to get them to be cooperative and get them on board. And I'm just curious, people don't like change. They don't like to be told that they're wrong. And, they have a lot of pride. Most people have a lot of pride. And when they take a position and then they're proven wrong or they're challenged, it's very difficult to get them on board. I'm curious how Dr. Kim realized that he had to get them to be collaborative in that scenario when there was so much anger and resistance. How did it dawn on you that you needed to get them to be collaborative, and what steps did you take to engage the naysayers and the people that were so resistant to change and had so much pride in their original position?
Well, just one brief example, Puna, and I'd love to hear more about your experiences too. But the World Health Organization at first was completely against treating drug-resistant tuberculosis, and they actually accused us of being unethical because they were saying, it's going to take too many resources away from treating garden variety tuberculosis. Again, not having checked whether the drugs were on patent or not. So we actually held a meeting, brought the WHO leaders, and let them essentially expropriate the idea behind treating drug-resistant TB. And so they actually came with a proposal. The term that they used for the treatment for regular TB was DOTS, D-O-T-S. It's kind of an arcane acronym, but important, and it was extremely effective. And so they left that meeting saying, well, what you guys are doing is just DOTS plus. Now, we could have fought that and said, no, this is unique, this is part of it, but we didn't. We completely gave over the branding of the effort to WHO. And they didn't know what they were doing early on because they hadn't had experience with it. But the minute that we were able to get them to expropriate the idea, then it really worked. And then what we did was we seconded somebody. That's an old Army term where you take one of your own employees and then pay their salary, but put them into the other organization. So we had one of our people, a very young, recent public health grad, and he actually lived and worked in Geneva inside WHO. From our perspective, it was as a spy to find out what was going on, but it was deeper than that. We wanted to show them through our goodwill that we believed in their leadership. We wanted them to maintain their leadership, but that their ideas had to change.
That's great. But I was going to say, what I've experienced as an entrepreneur and a leader here, when we're trying to implement change, a lot of times I just have to keep repeating myself and repeating myself, and also say to the team, to everybody that's working with me, hey, if I'm wrong, we'll pivot and we'll figure something else out. And, I'll eat dirt and it's okay, but let's just try this and see what the outcome is. And I guess that's how I get people engaged internally to buy into whatever we're trying to implement in terms of whether we're pivoting or whatever we're trying to accomplish internally within the organization. So that's important, cooperation and transparency.
Yeah,
Marshall, do you find that that's something? I'm sorry, Marshall. Do you find that that's something that you need to that you find that leaders need to be trained on? Is this idea, as Puna was saying, of having to repeat yourself, of having to be the one to go and eat dirt, of having to keep saying it over and over again, or is that something that people just understand that comes with the territory?
Oh, no. This is what I do for a living. This is what I do for a living. If you read Dave Chang's book, you'll see that I have leaders do this on a regular basis. In fact, even our esteemed Dr. Jim has had coaching before, and so he has had a little experience of humility on his side. We've got a lot of coaches on this call, but I've got just a couple of reflections. One is I've got a question for you. When you started as an entrepreneur, you were a kid. How old were you when you started?
Oh, well, my sister and I started Hard Candy together. She was 22 at the time and still in college, and I was 29, just embarking on a law career. And so, yeah, we were young. We didn't know what we were doing. And we could have never accomplished what we did without my parents' support and help. My mother basically came in. She managed my dad's outpatient surgical facility for 25 years in Michigan. And she came in one day and she said, so who's sending out the invoices? And we were both, what's an invoice? And she was like, oh my God, we can't just keep shipping product and making product and not charging people. So that's how naive we were at that point. But we were resilient and we persevered, and managing that company was like managing a bucking bronco. And I think every company has its unique challenges for the people that are running it, the people that are supporting it, and we're all working for each other. And if we keep that in mind, and we support one another and we're transparent as much as we possibly can be, I think that, we achieve the goals that we set out for ourselves eventually with a lot of heavy lifting.
And again, one thing that Pune, you and Dr. Jim have in common is you were both given a very clear, this is ridiculous, you can't do it message, and somehow ended up doing it in spite of that. So I think that's one thing you both have in common.
Yes, absolutely. With this company, Tokidoki, we're in our 15th year. Tokidoki, when I first started it and decided to invest in it and go for it, I had colleagues that were looking at me like I was absolutely insane, just like I've lost my mind. And I kept telling them, you don't understand. This is going to be a global brand. This is incredible. This is, they just thought I was crazy. But here we are, 15 years later, and we're living our dream, and we still have major aspirations for ourselves. So
that's great.
One of the things that you said in the past, Pune, about this, and Jim as well, what you're suggesting here is that you had this tight-knit community around you. It may have started with inspiration from a parent. It might have been something that came from your partners. Trying to pull together the group of early adapters is what I've heard both you and Jim talk about. I mean, you finally, at a certain point, find someone else who wants to own it. You're happy to have them co-own it, or even have it be their idea. Could you talk a little bit about that process of identifying those first early adapters? Because you can't take on all of the world that's against you. And then how do you...
When I met Simone Legno, who is my business partner, when the other co-founder and I, Ivan Arnold, met Simone Legno, Simone already had a following. He was living in Milan at the time. He was 26 when I met him, and he designs and creates everything in the Tokidoki world. And he actually has kind of philosophized the word Tokidoki, that we all wait for those moments in life that happen to us that actually change our lives. It's a very hopeful, you never know when your destiny will change or something will happen. And it's a very hopeful way of looking at your life. But back to what I was saying. So I lost my train of thought. Oh my gosh. I went off on Tokidoki philosophy land.
Don't worry about it. We're all friends here. We're all friends.
Actually, let me bring it back here. I think where Mark was going with this, and this ties in really well with this film, is this idea of capturing young spirit. And if you, in Bending the Arc, there is a part where Partners in Health is in Peru. And actually, this happened in Haiti also, where you are taking young people in the community and teaching them about Partners in Health and what can be accomplished. And the incredible role of these young people who are being formed by the company. You see what happens when they are 100% believers and proselytizers, and they're willing to even possibly get sick when they go into some of these homes. And I would love, and I think this, Pune and Jim, I think this applies to both you guys, is how do you think about this question of bringing on some of this? Is it intentional of reaching out to people who are just getting started in their careers or are becoming, are figuring out what they want to do for their lives and trying to make them part of your overall mission? How do you go about doing that? Or is it more like, look, these people are around and they have time and they're inexpensive, and so we're going to tap them? Is it intentional, or is it was it kind of accidental? Jim, why don't you start?
Well, we tried to. We did sessions with these young people that were not just about the work ahead, but about the philosophy. And we held sessions about, well, what does it mean to commit to the healthcare of poor people? And they were from this community, so they were. By any definition, low income themselves. But in asking them to take on these very difficult tasks, I mean, we were all being exposed to drug-resistant tuberculosis. We did our best to prevent us getting infected, but we knew that it would be impossible to completely prevent it. And so we had these sort of very serious discussions about, well, what do you think? Are this is we're all putting ourselves at risk, and anyone can opt out if you don't want. But here's why we're doing it. It's for these people, of course, but this has never been done before anywhere in the world. So if we can prove that with community health workers that we can treat this effectively, you're going to have an impact on the entire world. But we also want you to know that you're going to be at risk. So that was, and they became literally defenders of the faith. And then it was so interesting. One of my first trips as World Bank president was to China. And before Jack Ma became so famous at Alibaba, we had about a 3-hour dinner. And he was people just getting to know about Alibaba and the rest of the world. And he had about, I think, 12 or 13,000 employees. It's much, much bigger now, something like that. And he said that he had 30 people around him who he called defenders of the faith, that he thought that he had to have these 30 people who understood what he was trying to do, who understood it deep in their bones, and without them, he couldn't go forward. So it's very interesting that he did something very similarly. And so unless you get to the point where people understand the faith, understand what you're trying to do, and believe in it, it's really hard to take on the biggest problems.
Oh, that's fascinating. Puna, did you find the same thing? Did you have to find defenders, keepers of the faith?
Absolutely. I mean, we have people that they love Simone's art. They love the philosophy behind the Tokidoki name. They love our character families and what, each character family has a really resonating, soulful story. And it resonates with people on so many levels. We have a lot of fans that tattoo our artwork on their bodies, and they are brand ambassadors, and they spread the word, and it's a very viral kind of scenario. So they introduce the brand to their friends and their family, and they love, and especially during these times when we're so polarized as a community, and we're fighting against this COVID. I think it's really important for people to have some psychic relief and have some visual joy and happiness. They can open a Tokidoki and look at some of the artwork, and they get an instant joy from it. And so we need that. We need that right now. My understanding is with this COVID situation, unfortunately, 1 out of 4 kids is having suicidal thoughts. It's really a scary time for everybody. And so I think that it makes me happy that we serve people in that way while running a for-profit business.
Well, I think that is I want to remind everyone, if you have questions, please write them into the chat. We're looking at those questions and bringing them in. I want to bring in one question now that relates exactly to this, which is from Ruben Rocha, who says, how do you cultivate defenders of the faith employees in your organization? Any way you can shape organizational culture to promote this? So you guys have both talked a little bit about this idea of having these people, but how do you make them defenders of the faith? Or is there no way they just become defenders?
Yeah, Dr. Jim, what do you think?
At Partners in Health, and in every position I've been in, I think you have to get to first principles. You have to get to, well, why are we really doing this? And I think if it's just, look, I need a job, I need to make an income, sometimes that's a hard place to start from. So the most important thing for the leader is that you've got to really understand the deep meaning of what you're doing, not just the surface meaning, but the deep meaning of what you're doing. And for me, I've always found that if I can't find that deep meaning, it's hard for me to keep my attention on it or to do my best work. And so, I'm in the private sector now, and some people were surprised that I would do that. But I have to tell you, I think that in terms of the fight against poverty in the world, the most important thing that we can do is build the kind of infrastructure, basic electricity, transport, those kinds of things. If we don't build those, then it'll be very hard for people living in poverty around the world to be able to lift themselves out of poverty. So, even in this private sector world, for me, it's the deep meaning behind what I'm doing that's important. And so if you can get people there, then they'll embrace it in their own way. I mean, people are different. People have different ways of expressing themselves and feeling things. But I found that once you know what this means in terms of fundamental issues of equality, of humankind, of what we're trying to do in life, if you can get there, then it's much, much easier.
Well, and I think that Marshall mentioned earlier David Chang's book. Peach Marshall, I know you have helped coach David Chang, who's the founder of Momofuku. And one of the things he talks about in his book is this idea of, I think that accidentally he stumbled into this idea that he had a mission, and people wanted to be part of this mission. So it doesn't just have to be about saving lives. His mission was to bring incredibly affordable food that you might find in stalls in Asia to the U.S. And that's just where it started, was this like, hey, we're going to do this. It's us versus the rest of the restaurant industry, and we're going to win this. And people just wanted to be part of that. They wanted to be part of that mission. So it seems like he found those defenders of the faith, even though it was about food, not necessarily about saving lives. So it does seem to go from, it doesn't have to be, Marshall, I would think it would have to just be about like the biggest topics, right?
I think you got a great point that it's the message to me in the movie is not just about the movie, what happened, how it helped change the world. It's really a learning point for all of us to sit there and say, how do you do this? How do you go for that big thing and how do you make it happen? And Dr. Jim, one other thing, a lot of people on our call are coaches. So you're a member of our 100 coach organization. Puna's a member. Mark is a member. We're all part of our happy team. Dan, we need to recruit Dan to be a member. What do you think? We need to recruit Dan to join us on our happy club. So Dr. Jim, although, when I met you, you're already a ridiculously distinguished person with an MBA and a PhD in anthropology from Harvard. You had a great track record. You mentioned humility. You got a coach. Dave Chang had a coach. Talk about what it's like to have a coach and be coached, because a lot of our listeners right now, a lot of our viewers are coaches, and they'd be interested in hearing that.
Well, Marshall, I think one of the greatest pieces that have ever been written about coaching was by Atul Gawande in the New Yorker. And Atul is a celebrated author, a great surgeon. And he wrote in this article, and he's actually a good friend of mine. We practice at the same hospital. But Atul said, when he learned that Tiger Woods, the greatest golfer in the world, had a coach, he thought, wait a minute, I'm a surgeon and I have people's lives in my hand. Why don't I have a coach? Because in medicine, after you finish your fellowship, you don't get coached anymore. You're an attending physician, and really nobody critiques what you do. And so he got a coach, and the coach, at first, he was a senior recently retired physician. And the retired physician said, well, Atul, you're a great surgeon. I don't think there's anything that I can help you with. And Atul said, just humor me, come into the OR and watch what I do. And so the senior physician said, well, Atul, you're a great surgeon after this. And look, I don't know that I can teach you anything, but here are 13 things that I saw that you might think about. And so when Atul started doing those things, and he's such a smart guy, he measures every single outcome. All his numbers got better. He actually got better as a surgeon with the coach. And so, this was after I started coaching. I've always believed in it. Having been involved in athletics, I know that coaches can always be helpful. And so Marshall's been my coach now for about 12 years. And it completely changed my life. And what Marshall does is he talks to all the people who report to you or you report to, and he gives you feedback that's just searingly painful at first, but then it tells you how people see you. And so because Marshall has a very specific approach, he doesn't want to put you on the couch and talk about your relationship with your mother. He wants you to get better. And so he gave me very specific ways of trying to get better. And I don't feel like I've ever reached the kind of leadership skill of someone like Alan Mullally or Fred Hassan, these people that Marshall has coached as well. But I think I've gotten better, and at least I understand the process. And Mark, for example, Mark coached most of my senior leaders at the World Bank Group, and some of them got better, which was great and so inspiring for all of us. Some of them didn't, and those we had to exit from their position. So I completely believe in it, and it is the largest, the most powerful lesson in humility you can get. You've got to hear how other people are responding to you, and then you've got to make a decision. Do I want to get better, or do I not want to get better?
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
It is. Sounds very hard. And speaking of hard problems, we need to wrap up. I want to ask a very hard question for you. Maybe this is an easy question. We'll see what the answer is, Jim. This comes from Christian Sarkar, who says, what are some ways we can work together to fight COVID to support our public health systems? So what would you say to people?
Well, Dan, it's something that I've been working a lot on. I've been working with the state of Massachusetts. Partners in Health has gotten involved. And the crazy thing is, the reason we got involved is because the public health community in the United States, for lots of reasons that I think are understandable, there wasn't testing, there was no the PPE, the masks, et cetera. So because of a really bad start and frankly, bad performance all throughout, the public health community kind of gave up. And so we came in and we said, no, you can't give up, because unless you have testing, contact tracing, isolation, quarantine, unless you have that system in place, we'll never get out of this. Because even if there are so many cases and we can't follow them all right now, someday it's going to get better. And especially if we have this vaccine, if everyone takes the vaccine, then it's going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. But at the end, we're still going to have this capacity to go after every single infection. And so that's what we've been trying to build at Partners in Health. And so what I would say is, look, in the early days, we weren't sure that masks are helpful, but now we know that masks are extremely helpful. And we've even seen cases where, 2 hairdressers who were positive for COVID and treated and cut lots of people's hair over a period of time, being positive, that not a single person got infected in that salon because everybody was wearing a mask. So masks are so much more effective than we had thought, even early on in the pandemic. That's one. The second is to get ready to get the vaccine. It's not going to be as simple as people think, because one, there are 2 doses. And anytime you have a dose that's more than 1, the compliance drops. So we have to have some way of following people up. And so, the whatever people can do to make sure that everyone that gets the 2 doses of the vaccine, once we know that it's safe, that will be really important. But unfortunately, life in China has gotten back almost completely to normal. South Korea almost completely to normal. When there are 10 cases or 50 cases in South Korea, people go nuts. And they respond very aggressively. We're in a different place, so it's going to take longer for us. So have patience. Don't travel during the holiday. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to travel during the holiday. Wear a mask and get that vaccine when it's available.
That's great. And as Marshall said, there are a lot of people who are on the call today who are coaches who have the ability to get people to listen to what they say and coach them through this. Maybe if there's a way to coach your communities through wearing a mask and taking both rounds of the vaccine and being ready for it, and teach others to do the same. Sounds like we might be able to make some kind of a dent. Thank you so much for everyone for joining with us today. Marshall, thanks for having me on the show. Marshall, Mark, Jim, Poonam, this has been such an interesting conversation. I would highly encourage everyone to watch Bending the Arc. It's on Netflix right now. It is really inspiring. I learned a lot. I cried a little bit. And it made me want to watch it again, and it made me want to give back. So please watch it. I think you'll have the same reaction. In fact, we're going to end here with a 2-minute look at the film itself. So I hope you'll stick around, and we'll be back live on LinkedIn soon enough with even more great conversations.
Thank you.
Et m'pas gon l'hôpital m'te fait que j'aime dire qui j'en des maladies qui m'te fait. Et bien, celle ça a été fait pour moi, il était uniquement préparer tout testament. Je l'aime pas ici de l'hôpital Kange. Docteur Polo te dit non, je peux pas mourir.
I went to Haiti in 1983. I hadn't even started medical school. I met the people who would become my best friends and coworkers.
I had never seen such abject misery in my life.
We started going house to house, and people were so sick.
And I thought, how can we get this fixed?
Jim and Paul were constantly going back and forth, and they would borrow things from some of the hospitals.
I would put that medicine in these big suitcases. They usually thought I was a tourist.
As soon as we opened the clinic doors, it was every possible disease you could imagine.
Elle a besoin d'urgence tout de suite. She's dying. I think it's too late.
This was life or death. Getting medicines down there was life or death. And everything was conspiring against us.
The scientific community hated it. They said it's not sustainable, it's silly, this could never be replicated.
We could not administer the program because we don't have the doctors.
In that script, we are uneducated, of course, stupid.
If you've traveled to rural Africa, you know this. People do not know what watches and clocks are.
None of our patients have died. One person died a few days after starting therapy because we started too late.
It took us from being outsiders right into the middle of the debate.
The results were dramatic and transformative.
We decided this could be something like a movement.
You are accountable to who? People are dying, my brother.
Rwanda is the most dramatic arc to a recovery.
Threats of the deadly Ebola virus landing in the East African region.
All borders are informed and screen anyone coming in Rwanda.
Tout le monde c'est monde. Si moi-même cap vivre jodi am aimé.
To me, this is about hope, and it's about rejecting despair and cynicism.